Dr. Amara Ibori sat in her office, looking at a photograph taken during one of the nights she had spent with Darius. In the picture, they were captured against the backdrop of a lake, a place they often went to escape prying eyes. Amara traced her finger across the man's face in the photograph and sighed. Tomorrow she had to tell him that their relationship was over. It had all started about 6 months ago. Darius Okafor had first appeared at Dr. Ibor's office complaining of anxiety and anger management issues. He was attractive, tall, athletic, with piercing eyes and nervous, jerky movements. By the third session, Amara found herself thinking about him more than she should have. It was unprofessional, and she knew it. Darius talked about his childhood, how his father used to hit him, how he found his mother unconscious after an overdose when he was 12. He talked about his job as a gym teacher, how much he loved children, and how he feared he had inherited his father's temper. He looked at her with eyes full of pain, and Amara felt something inside her reaching out to him, a desire not just to help, but to protect and heal. During the 5th session, when Darius talked about his ex-girlfriend, Amara noticed something more than just a patient's trust in his eyes for the first time. She should have stopped it then, should have referred him to another specialist. But she didn't. Amara remembered the evening when everything changed. Darius lingered after the session, talking about his progress in therapy. Then he suddenly asked, "Have you ever thought of me as anything other than a patient?" She should have replied, "No, Darius, this conversation is inappropriate." Instead, Amara felt her heart race and just stared at him, unable to find the words. Then he took a step toward her and she didn't back away. Their first kiss was hurried, full of shame, and at the same time an inappropriate joy. After that, Amara spent a sleepless night promising herself that she would call Darius in the morning and tell him she had made a mistake. But in the morning, she simply rescheduled his appointment for a special consultation. And when he arrived, they both knew that the therapy was over. The following months turned into a whirlwind of secret meetings. They never appeared together in the city, always traveling outside its limits. To everyone else, Darius remained her patient, although the therapy sessions had long since turned into dates in motels or on a deserted lakeshore. Amara knew she was risking everything, her reputation, her license, her marriage. But there was something intoxicating about the relationship, something that made her feel alive after so many years of emotional numbness. Her marriage to Kamal had long since become a well-rehearsed performance. Kamal Ibor was a successful banker who often traveled on business and came home late. They lived like roommates, sharing a living space but not a life. Amara couldn't even remember the last time they had a real conversation, let alone been intimate. With Darius, everything was different. She felt like a woman, not just a psychologist or a wife. He was emotional, passionate, sometimes unstable, but sincere in his feelings. They could talk for hours about pain, about love, about past traumas. She shared things with him that she had never told her husband, and he seemed to understand her better than anyone else. At some point, Amara began to fantasize about leaving Kamal and starting a new life with Darius. But reality always came back. Her scandalous breach of professional ethics, his instability, the inevitability of public condemnation. The first alarm bell rang when Darius began insisting that she introduce him to her friends so they could be seen together in town. When Amara refused, explaining the risks, he showed the first signs of the very temper he had once brought to her therapy sessions. He didn't shout, but his voice became cold and controlled, with barely contained rage. "You're ashamed of me," he said then. "I'm just a dirty secret to you, aren't I?" The second alarm bell rang when Amara's colleague, Dr. Tandy Mweng, took her aside after a professional conference. Tandy was not just a colleague, but Amara's best friend since college. They had a glass of wine at the hotel bar, and Tandy asked cautiously, "What's going on between you and Okafor?" Amara tried to deny it, but Tandy had seen them together in a neighboring town when she was visiting her sister. Her best friend didn't judge her, but she warned her, "You know this is wrong and dangerous. Have you read his file, his history of domestic violence, his relationships with his exes? It's a classic case. He's idealizing you now, but what will happen when you disappoint him? And you will inevitably disappoint him." Amara dismissed the warnings, assuring herself that Tandy didn't know Darius as well as she did. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to sprout when she started noticing other signs. Darius's possessive gestures, his jealousy when she talked about her male patients, his insistent calls when she didn't answer right away. The third and final alarm bell rang a week ago. Darius came to her house. He had never done that before, knowing that her husband lived there. Fortunately, Kamal was away on business. Darius stood at the door, his eyes red as if he had been crying or drinking. "I just wanted to see where you live," he said, trying to smile. "Where you sleep with him." Amara didn't let him in, but that evening was a point of no return. She realized that the situation was spiraling out of control and that Tandy was right. She had to end it before it went too far. And now, sitting in her office looking at the photo, Amara was preparing for tomorrow. She composed a speech in her mind, choosing words that would be firm but not cruel. She didn't want to hurt Darius, but she knew she had to be decisive. No, maybe later, or let's stay friends. The next day, she was nervous as she waited for him in her office. She had scheduled the meeting for the end of the day when no one else would be in the office, a mistake she would realize later. Darius arrived right on time, bringing flowers, another oddity, as they had always been careful about such things. "We need to talk," Amara began, not accepting the bouquet. Darius looked at her, and understanding gradually began to dawn in his eyes. "This has to end, Darius. What we have is wrong. I violated professional ethics, and I'm ashamed of it. You deserve a real, healthy relationship without lies and secrets." She expected anger, accusations, maybe tears. But Darius just stood there motionless, with the same flowers in his hands. His face became unnaturally calm, like a mask. Only in his eyes was there something dark and unrecognizable. "Is this because of him? Because of your husband?" he finally asked. "No, it's not about Kamal. It's about me, what I did. This should never have started." "Do you love me?" Amara hesitated. The truth could give him false hope. A lie could intensify the pain. "My feelings don't matter. What matters is what's right." The silence became oppressive. Finally, Darius placed the flowers on the table. "I understand," he said with unnatural calm. "We both need time." He left without a scene, too easily, too calmly. It should have alarmed her, but Amara felt only relief. She didn't know that Darius had gone straight to a bar, where he drank until closing time, and then home, replaying every word they had said, every moment of intimacy, every promise made and unmade. 2 days later, Amara came home late. She had had a hard day filled with patients and administrative work. Kamal was away on business again. Now she wondered if all his trips were really work-related. As she pulled up to her house, Amara noticed an unfamiliar car nearby, but didn't think much of it. The neighborhood was safe, and her neighbors often had guests. She parked, gathered her things, and headed for the front door. And then she saw him. Darius was standing on her porch, leaning against the wall. In the light of the street lamp, his silhouette seemed menacingly motionless, and he was holding an axe in his hand. "Darius!" she called, feeling her heart sink. He slowly turned his head toward her. There was nothing in his eyes but emptiness, the terrifying, lifeless emptiness she sometimes saw in patients in deep dissociation. "You're home," he said simply, taking a step toward her. "I've been waiting." Amara froze, unable to move. Fear paralyzed her, but the professional part of her brain was working feverishly, trying to find a way out. "Let's talk, Darius. Just talk," she suggested, trying to keep her voice calm. "We've already talked," he replied with a sinister smile. "Now it's time for action." He raised the axe, and at that moment, Amara realized that all her psychological training, all her knowledge of human behavior, meant nothing. Before her stood a man who had lost touch with reality, a man whose pain had transformed into danger. Amara did the only thing she could do. She ran. Detective Zuberi Nkosi arrived at the scene as the clock approached 4 in the morning. He had been called urgently, interrupted from a short sleep. There had been a murder in the upscale suburb of Sufola. The Woodcrest neighborhood was considered one of the safest in the city, which made the case all the more shocking. As he pulled up to the 2-story light brick house, Nkosi noticed nervous excitement among the neighbors who had gathered, despite the late hour. Two patrol officers were holding back the crowd behind a yellow tape marked "Crime Scene." "Detective Nkosi," he introduced himself, showing his badge to the young officer. "What do we have here?" "A man about 30 years old, gunshot wound to the chest," the patrolman reported. The homeowner, Dr. Amara Ibori, called the police around 11 p.m. and reported that her former patient was threatening her with an axe. By the time the first patrol arrived, she was at her neighbor's house across the street. "And the deceased is this patient?" "Yes, sir. We found him in the living room when we returned to the house with Dr. Ibori." Nkosi nodded and headed inside. He always preferred to see the crime scene before talking to victims or witnesses. The scene often told more than people did. A team of forensic investigators was working in the living room. The body lay on its back in the middle of the room, surrounded by a dark pool of blood. An axe lay nearby, a common one that could be bought at any hardware store. Nkosi approached the medical examiner, who was bent over the body. "Good morning, Dr. Mbeki." The medical examiner nodded in response without looking up from his work. "If you can call it that." "Male, African American, about 30 years old. Gunshot wound to the chest. The bullet went through, damaging the heart. Death was instantaneous, approximately between 10 and 11 p.m. "A pistol?" 9 millimeters, presumably. "The bullet will be found by the forensic team. It should be somewhere in the wall. The shot was fired from close range, no more than 3 meters. Nkosi looked around. The room looked untouched, except for an overturned coffee table. On the walls were abstract paintings, and on the mantelpiece were several framed photographs. A middle-aged woman with a tall man, presumably her husband. "What about the axe?" Nkosi asked, pointing to the tool. "Looks like the victim brought it with him. There are fingerprints on the handle, but it hasn't been used. There's no blood on it." The detective photographed the scene with his phone, then walked into the hallway. The front door had no visible damage. The lock was intact. "Where's the owner?" "In the kitchen with Officer Jones." Nkosi found Dr. Ibori sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched tea. A tall woman with short hair and impeccable posture. She looked shocked, but surprisingly composed for someone whose home had just been the scene of a murder. "Dr. Ibori, I'm Detective Zuburi Nkosi. Can I ask you a few questions?" Amara raised her head. Her eyes were red but dry. "Yes, of course. Tell me what happened." Amara straightened up, taking a deep breath as if preparing for a professional report. "I came home around 9 o'clock in the evening. My husband was away on business. I was alone. When I pulled up to the house, I saw Darius Okafor, on the porch. He had an axe in his hand." "Darius Okafor, your patient?" Amara lowered her eyes. "He was. We had a relationship. Unprofessional on my part. I ended it a few days ago." Nkosi kept a neutral expression, though he noted her candor. Many in her position would have tried to hide such a fact. "Continue." "When I saw him with the axe, I was scared. I ran to the neighbors across the street, the Tutus. They let me in and called the police. I stayed with them until the patrol arrived. And then we went back to the house with the officers, and we found Darius dead in the living room." "Did you see or hear anything unusual coming from the Tutu house? A gunshot, for example?" Amara shook her head. "No. We were sitting in the kitchen at the back of the house, and I was in shock. I wasn't really paying attention." "Did anyone know about your relationship with Mr. Okafor?" "My colleague, Dr. Tandy Mweng. She saw us together by accident and figured it out. As far as I know, no one else." "Was the front door locked when you ran away?" Amara froze, then shook her head cautiously. "No, I was in a panic. I just ran." Nkosi made a note in his notebook. "Did your husband know about your relationship?" "No, at least I don't think so. We haven't been very close lately." "When will he be back?" "The day after tomorrow. We'll keep you updated on the investigation. In the meantime, perhaps you should stay with friends or relatives." Amara nodded. "I'll call Tandy." Leaving the kitchen, Nkosi headed across the street to the Tutu house. He needed to confirm Dr. Ibor's alibi. Justin and Noma Tutu, an elderly couple, greeted him in their bathrobes, clearly roused from their sleep by the night's events. Mr. and Mrs. Tutu, Detective Nkosi, I need to ask you a few questions about tonight. Of course, Detective, replied Justin Tutu, a tall man with a graying beard. A terrible tragedy. What time did Dr. Ibori come to you? Around 9 o'clock, replied Noma Tutu. She was in a panic, screaming that her patient was threatening her with an axe. We dragged her inside and called the police right away. And she stayed here until the police arrived? Yes, the whole time, Justin confirmed. She sat with Noma in the kitchen, drinking tea. I waited by the window, watching Amara's house, but I didn't see anyone come out. Did you hear a gunshot? The couple looked at each other. No, Justin replied. But our TV was on loud. We were watching a basketball game. Did you see anyone enter Dr. Ibor's house after she came to you? No, Justin shook his head. But I wasn't watching the whole time. I went to the kitchen to check on Noma and Amara, and I went to the bathroom. Besides, Noma added, from our angle, we can only see part of the porch and the front door of Amara's house. The side entrance isn't visible at all. Nkosi made a note. This information was important. If the side entrance wasn't visible from Tutu's house, someone could have entered the house unnoticed. Returning to the crime scene, Nkosi walked around the house. Sure enough, from the side entrance, Tutu's house was partially hidden by a large oak tree and a hedge. The side door led directly into the kitchen, bypassing the hallway. Interesting. Detective, called the forensic scientist as he came out of the house. We found something interesting. In the living room, one of the technicians pointed to a small smear of dirt near the sofa. This doesn't look like ordinary shoe dirt, more like mulch from the garden center. And look at this. He pointed to faint traces leading from the stain to the back of the house. Check the back door, Nkosi ordered. A few minutes later, he was told that there were signs of forced entry on the back door handle. Faint scratches, as if from a lockpick. By lunchtime, a preliminary picture of the incident was beginning to emerge. Darius Oka had indeed come to Dr. Ibori's house with an axe, probably to scare or even harm her after their breakup. She had fled to her neighbors, leaving the front door unlocked. Presumably, while Amara was at Tutu's, someone entered the house through the back door, either a random burglar who saw an opportunity to break into an empty house, or someone who had been watching the house. This person unexpectedly encountered Darius in the living room and shot him, probably out of fear. The question was, who was the third person involved? The next day, Nkosi received the results of the examination. The bullet was removed from the wall, and the caliber was 9 millimeters, as expected. Microparticles of soil used in garden centers, a special mixture for indoor plants, were found on the floor. A car from the Green Oasis Garden Center was parked on the next street. They were working on a landscaping job at one of the houses. Nkosi went to Green Oasis and showed the photo of Darius to the employees. No one recognized him. But when he asked about recent new employees, the manager mentioned a guy named Levi Zongo, a young immigrant from Burkina Faso who had started working there 3 weeks ago. Levi had been absent for 2 days and was not answering his phone. Do you have his address? Only the one on the application, the manager replied, showing him the form. The Traveler Motel on the outskirts of town. Levi hadn't been at the motel since yesterday. His belongings were still in his room, but he was gone. Among his things, they found an old photograph of Levi with a woman and a little girl, presumably his family. Nkosi requested information from immigration databases. Levi Zongo, 26 years old, a refugee who had been granted temporary asylum. His wife and daughter had remained in Burkina Faso, waiting for an opportunity to reunite. Continuing their search, they checked surveillance cameras in the area of the incident. On one of them, from a gas station 2 blocks from Ibor's house, they spotted a man resembling Levi walking quickly toward a bus stop around midnight. Information from Border Control confirmed that no one with that name had crossed the border. He was still in the country. 3 days later, Levi Zongo came to the police station himself. He looked exhausted, his eyes red from lack of sleep. I heard you were looking for me, he said, slumping heavily into a chair in the interrogation room. I didn't mean to kill that man. I didn't know anyone was in the house. Zongo told his story. He worked as a gardener during the day and sometimes committed petty thefts from houses at night to send money to his family. That evening, he noticed a woman running out of a house in a panic and across the street. Deciding that the house was empty, He waited until dark and broke in through a back door, using skills he had learned from a cellmate at the refugee center. I thought no one was there. I just wanted to take something valuable and leave. Then I heard footsteps in the living room. I got scared and took out my gun. He came out with an axe. I shot without thinking. Where did you get the gun? Asked Nkosi. I bought it on the black market. For $200, for protection. I live in a bad neighborhood. What did you do after the shooting? I ran away through the back door. I threw the gun into the river. I've been hiding at a friend's place these past few days, but then I realized I couldn't live with this. Nkosi listened carefully, taking notes. Zongo's story matched all the available evidence. Dr. Iburi was indeed at her neighbor's house when the murder took place. Darius did come with an axe, probably to threaten or attack her. And he had indeed been killed by a third person, a random robber with no connection to Amara or her former patient. Amara Ibori received news of the suspect's arrest while at her friend Tandy's house. When Detective Nkosi told her the details of what had happened, she burst into tears for the first time since the night of the murder. He died because of me, she said. If I hadn't started a relationship with him, if I hadn't given him hope. Dr. Iboy, Nkosi interrupted her. Darius came to your house with an axe. He was a threat. The tragedy is that he encountered a frightened person with a weapon, but his own actions led to his death. Amara shook her head, unconvinced by the detective's words. I knew his story, his trauma. I knew how he reacted to rejection, and yet... Nkosi left her with these thoughts. As a detective, he had solved the case. The killer turned out to be Levi Zongo, who had stumbled into the house by chance looking for valuables. All the evidence corroborated his statement, including an examination of the gun he had thrown into the river, which was found based on his description. But for Amara Ibori, the investigation was just beginning, an investigation into her own guilt, the consequences of crossing professional boundaries, and her indirect role in the death of a man who had once entrusted her with his deepest traumas. Detective Zuberi Nkosi sat in his office, reviewing the files on the Levi Zongo case. 3 days of questioning, evidence checking, and witness interviews all pointed to the accidental murder theory being correct. Zongo, a 26-year-old immigrant from Burkina Faso, had no connection to either Amara Ibori or Darius Okafor. His story about using gardening work as a cover for scouting potential targets for theft was confirmed after questioning his motel neighbors. They said that Levi often returned late at night with small jewelry or electronics, which he then sold to send money to his family. The gun, which had been thrown into the river, was found by divers following Zongo's directions. Forensic tests confirmed that the bullet that killed Darius was fired from that weapon. Levi's fingerprints were still on the handle, despite having been in the water. Detective, a young patrol woman knocked on the office door. You have a visitor. A tall, thin man in a strict suit entered the office. Nkosi recognized him from the photos at Ibor's house. Kemal, Amara's husband. Mr. Ibori, I was just about to call you. Have a seat. Kemal sat down without taking off his coat. His face was tense, with deep wrinkles around his lips. I want to know what happened, the whole truth. Nkosi nodded. Has your wife told you about the break-in and the murder? Yes. And about her relationship with the patient. Kemal's voice was even, but his eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and pain. I want to hear the details from an official. Nkosi recounted the facts as they had been established by the investigation. The affair between Amara and her patient, his appearance with an axe after they broke up, Amara's flight to her neighbors, the burglar's intrusion, the chance encounter, the shot. We arrested Levi Zongo. He confessed to everything, and all the evidence corroborates his statement. The case is almost closed. Kemal listened without interrupting. When Nkosi finished, he asked only one question. If she hadn't started a relationship with this man, would anything have happened? Nkosi sighed. Mr. Ibori, in my practice, I have seen that tragedies are often the result of a whole chain of decisions and coincidences. If your wife hadn't entered into a relationship with the patient, he wouldn't have come with an axe. If she had locked the door when she ran away, the robber wouldn't have been able to get in. If Zongo hadn't decided to rob your house, we could go on and on. Kemal smiled coldly. You talk like a psychologist, a detective. But I'm a banker. I'm used to analyzing root causes, and here, it's obvious. He stood up, buttoning his coat. Thank you for the information. I have a serious conversation with my wife ahead of me. After he left, Nkosi stared at the door for a long time. He suspected that for Amara Ibor, the consequences were only just beginning. Sure enough, the next day, Nkosi learned that a complaint had been filed against Dr. Ibori with the State Psychological Association's Ethics Committee. The complaint was filed by an anonymous source who reported a violation of professional ethics, an affair with a patient. Nkosi called Amara to warn her. She answered in a calm, almost detached voice. I know it was Kamal. He filed for divorce last night. I'm sorry. Don't be. I deserve the consequences. I've been suspended from practice pending the committee's decision, but I'll probably lose my license. Nkosi wanted to say something comforting, but couldn't find the words. The law was on Amara's side when it came to murder. She had nothing to do with Darius's death. But when it came to professional ethics, she had indeed committed a serious violation. A week after Zongo's arrest, Nkosi met with Amara again. She asked to meet at a cafe near the police station. When he arrived, she was already waiting, hunched over a cup of cold coffee. Amara looked 10 years older, her face gaunt, her eyes dull. I'm moving, she said instead of a greeting. To Atlanta, I have a sister there. Nkosi nodded. A wise decision. Before I leave, I wanted to give you something. It may help you understand why everything happened the way it did. She took a folder out of her bag. A copy of Darius's file. I know I shouldn't have taken it out of the office, but it doesn't matter now. Nkosi took the folder. Are you sure you want me to see this? Yes. Maybe it will help other psychologists avoid my mistakes, if you share it anonymously. The detective nodded, realizing that Amara was looking for a way to atone. That evening, Nkosi studied the documents. Darius Okafor's story was even darker than he had imagined. A boy who grew up with an abusive father and a drug-addicted mother. Beatings, humiliation, constant fear. At 12, he attempted suicide after finding his mother unconscious from an overdose. Then came foster homes, where the abuse continued in other forms. As a teenager, he experienced his first outbursts of uncontrollable anger directed at authority figures. His first girlfriend ran away from him after he smashed her phone in a fit of jealousy. The second filed a police report when he blocked the door and wouldn't let her out of the apartment during an argument. He came to Dr. Ibori on the recommendation of a school counselor who noticed alarming signs in his behavior toward his colleagues. In his sessions, Darius exhibited classic symptoms of borderline personality disorder: extreme dependence on significant others, fear of rejection, mood swings, and unstable self-perception. Tandy Mweng was right. For a patient like this, with his history of trauma and rejection, breaking up with a therapist who had become his lover was practically a guaranteed trigger for a crisis. In Amara's notes about her last session with Darius, before their breakup, his words were highlighted in red. You're the only one who really understands me. Without you, I have nothing left. Slamming the folder shut, Nkosi felt a heavy weight. He had seen many crimes committed out of love, jealousy, and rejection, but this case stood out for its sad irony. A woman whose job was to help psychologically vulnerable people had herself become the cause of her patient's emotional breakdown. The next day, the detective visited Dr. Tandy Mweng at her office. She was immersed in her work, her desk piled high with files, the result of Amara's patient reassignments. I read Darius's file, Nkosi said without preamble. You warned Amara. Tandy put down her pen and leaned back in her chair. Yes, but she didn't believe me, or didn't want to believe me. Why do you think that is? She's an experienced psychologist. Sometimes it's experience that creates the illusion of control. We think we can predict and prevent people's reactions because we understand their psyche. It's a professional trap. Tandy sighed. And also, Amara was unhappy in her marriage, emotionally starved. Darius, with his intensity, his complete focus on her. It was like a drug. Nkosi nodded. It matched his observations of Amara and her husband. Do you think she understood the potential danger Darius posed? On a rational level, of course. She read his file, she knew his history, but emotionally, Tandy shook her head. We often don't want to see the warning signs in people we're attached to, especially when we initiated that attachment ourselves. Will she lose her license? Almost certainly, but that's the least of her losses. She lost herself, her sense of herself as an ethical professional. That's much worse. On the last day before leaving town, Amara Ibora visited Darius's grave. Nkosi saw her there when he arrived to pay his respects to the victim, his personal ritual after completing each case. He watched as Amara placed a bouquet of white lilies on the fresh grave and stood for a long time with her head bowed. The detective did not approach, giving her space to say goodbye and perhaps repent. A month after Amara left Sufol, Nkosi received a letter from her. In a brief and dry note, she informed him that the ethics committee had revoked her license as a psychologist, with the right to appeal in 3 years. She also wrote that she had enrolled in nursing courses. She wanted to continue helping people, but in a different role, where the impact of my emotional mistakes will be less destructive. At the end of the letter was a postscript. I often think about the concept of boundaries. In therapy, we learn to set them, respect them, understand their function, to protect us and others. By crossing professional boundaries with Darius, I not only betrayed my ethics, but also set off a chain of events that led to his death. The death of a man who came to me for healing. Nkosi kept the letter. In his 20 years as a detective, he had seen countless cases where seemingly minor, insignificant decisions led to irreparable consequences. This was one of them. The decision of an experienced psychologist to cross boundaries with a patient. The decision of a rejected lover to show up with an axe. The decision of a frightened robber to shoot. The case of Darius Okafor's death was officially closed. Levi Zongo pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. His wife and daughter were granted humanitarian visas and moved to the United States, where they visited him in prison. Kamali Bori divorced Amara and transferred to his bank's California branch. Tandy Mwenga continued her practice, often using an anonymous version of Amara's story as a warning to young psychologists. And Nkosi himself? He continued his work, investigating new crimes and uncovering new secrets of human relationships. But the story of Amara and Darius remained with him, a reminder of the fine line between professional care and personal involvement, of how easy it is to cross the invisible lines that protect us from ourselves. Sometimes, when looking at new cases, he remembered the words from Amara's letter about boundaries and their function, and he thought about how, in many of the tragedies he had investigated, it was the violation of boundaries, emotional, physical, ethical, that was at the root of the problem, and about how important it was to remember those boundaries, even when, especially when, crossing them seemed harmless or justified. After all, as the case of Amara and Darius had shown, the price of such a crossing could be immeasurably higher than anyone could have imagined.